Well, all right, everybody. Welcome to the Code 3 Industries podcast. I am your host, Nick Lopez. Today's guest, I have Josh Grandinetti, retired fire captain from Eloy Fire Department, now full-time paramedic with La Mesa Fire Department, and also the founder of Foundation Fortified. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Before we hopped on, I was looking a little bit at the Foundation Fortified, your website, and looking at the apps and just trying to gauge a little bit about what mindfulness represents. And so, first, before I get into that, I wanted just to get a little bit into your background
Okay.
and what got you started with the fire department.
Yeah, man. Circa 2008, I just graduated high school a while before that, and was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And I was really interested in studying the brain. I really was interested in how the human mind works and how our experience is created. And so I was really interested in maybe studying the mind and maybe becoming a neuroscientist. But over the weekend, one random weekend, I took a CPR and first aid class, and that was being taught by a local firefighter. And I just thought she was wonderful. I thought was the most know-how person I've ever met and the most cool, calm, and collected. And I just thought it had something to do with the fire department, the job. So I started asking her questions about the industry and kind of totally did a 180 and decided to go into the fire service and derange my life doing that for the last 15, 16 years. So that's kind of what got me into at least, the fire side of the world. So
Oh, so you've been at almost 15, 16 years, and then you said you retired from the Eloy Fire
hmm
Department,
hmm
and that was regarding was an on-duty injury.
yeah, so unfortunately, I snapped my right knee on shift twice, once in 2021. Prior to that, I'd been, in the fire service for about 12 years. And in 2021, I snapped my right knee once. I rehabbed it, got back to the truck by the end of that year. And then 2023, November, so coming up on 2 years now, I snapped my right knee again, only this time it was a much more well developed injury. So
And
last year, I got several knee surgeries and I had to learn how to rewalk again and everything. But I'm on my feet now working for Mesa Fire, but I just work on the ambulance side. So I just transport emergency medical calls or lack of emergency medical calls, to the hospital as a functioning paramedic. So that's what I do now.
wow, that must have been a heck of a recovery time. And I'm sure that that's, when when you need mindfulness the most, especially during that recovery time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely found myself in a chair for many hours, alone with my own mind, and I had to figure out how to wrestle with it. Having the
Yeah.
skills of mindfulness meditation was definitely a benefit for that year, for sure.
And just wondering, like, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced, like, early on in your career as a first responder?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, early on, to be honest with you, I wasn't prepared for the demanding life changes it was going to cause. And I
Mhm.
don't get me wrong, I fully embraced all these issues when I got on. It didn't take me long. That's why I was able to do the career. But I remember, my first couple of weeks just really struggling with the sleep deprivation. I really struggled with that. I got hired on to an Indian reservation actually for my first 5 years of my career, Gila River Indian Reservation, and I had a lot of fun out there. We got to do a lot of cool stuff, but there's definitely a little bit of reverse racism that I got to contend with there, which was healthy as a person to kind of experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of somebody not liking me just because of the way I look. But
Sure.
on the Indian reservation, it can kind of just be that way given the history of things. But by and large, that was a lot of fun experience, and I enjoyed every bit of that. So I struggled with the sleep deprivation. I struggled with kind of some of the community concerns I had. Outside of that, I was just loving being a firefighter and doing something important when I was younger. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It felt like a lot of my friends at that time were going to their jobs just selling cars or, doing something like that in the business sector. And it really felt fulfilling back then in my early 20s to be doing something that seemed to matter to so many people. So it was definitely something I was excited to have taken hold of and made my job.
Right. I mean, I can imagine, every call. I mean, just like me, every radio call you get coming in from the station, you have no idea what you're gonna walk into,
Right.
who you're gonna encounter. So it could definitely be every call's an adventure.
Yeah, that's
That's for
true.
sure. But like you were talking about, you started feeling the effects of the job, the sleep deprivation, all the wear and tear that comes with being a first responder, a cop, a firefighter. And what I was just wondering, like for you personally, like at what point did you really start realizing the toll the job was taking on your both like your physical and your mental health?
Yeah, it's a good question too. I began to find myself being kind of frustrated when I was off shift. Even on shift, I began to be a little bit, impatient and a little bit more, lash out as a person. And, I kind of wanted to figure out what was causing that. And through a little bit of mindfulness practice, after I discovered it for a little while and was practicing, I kind of learned that I wasn't so much angry and frustrated. I was just very anxious. The job had made me a very anxious person, almost like I was used to just being a lab in a maze and not knowing which direction was going to cause the jolt. I remember just hearing people's cell phones going off in the grocery store and thinking it was a call and just kind of jumping, and just always on that alert system, never really being able to turn that off. So that was definitely one of the biggest struggles for me early on, was just that the anxiety component that comes with that constant being on the clock, never really being down. Even when you're at the station, you're always kind of waiting for those tones to drop. So I definitely struggled with some anxiety early on. Mindfulness has definitely helped me through a little bit of that, but it wasn't before I, caused a lot of disruption in my own life before I figured that out.
Sure. And you know what? That's unfortunately that's I think one of the many negative side effects of being a first responder is it bleeds into your personal life. And there's a reason why, drug rates, suicide rates, unfortunately that are sky high that come with being a first responder. But it's great that you are able to A, recognize it and B, being able to be self-sufficient and being able to help yourself. Because I know what that's another thing too, and we're gonna get into it as well, is being a first responder. And I know, November is Men's Mental Health Month,
Hmm.
being able to recognize when we need help. But I know, especially being on the job, how big of a stigma that is to reach out for help, A, and B, being a man and really not wanting to reach out for help because A, we're kind of told as men to suck it up, tough shit, get through it, and B, not want to be seen as, less than by your
Yeah.
partners or even, um, afraid of what can happen if you do reach out for help within like the whole admin side of things.
Hmm.
Are you taken off? Are you placed on leave?
Right.
Are the negative connotation? Are you seen as a quote unquote 5150 that you can't handle the job? Um, so I mean, there's a lot that comes with it,
Yeah,
and
that's why, and unfortunately, a lot of people have to contend with that stigma. And, podcasts like yourself and organizations that are all over social media these days trying to help first responders or trying to break through, like you said, that stigma. But still, there's still a lot of people that are afraid of the consequences that come with admitting that you have a problem or developing a problem, or even worried that you might have a problem. If somebody starts having chest pain at work, people immediately flock to them and want them to get healthy and want them to get better and want them to take as much time off at work as they need to until their heart is functioning appropriately. But when your mind isn't functioning appropriately, we just don't have that same ability to see it as a true medical concern or a true problem yet. We don't see our minds quite the same way we see our hearts when they're having a heart attack, and we just need to be a little bit better at understanding that at some point, there's no difference between a heart that needs work and rest and then a mind that needs work and rest. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
invisible wounds, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
And going off of that, was there any, particular incident or turning point that led you toward mindfulness and meditation? Or was it just, after a while, the wear and tear, and like you brought up before, just being anxious and feeling like you're hearing the tones drop and just that hypervigilance that comes
Yeah.
with just being a first responder? And
No, so like I said earlier, I was always kind of interested in the mind and how it works, and when I found myself just being more anxious, I didn't want to go seek therapy because I didn't feel like I was at the point where my life was being disrupted in any major way. And I remember somebody suggesting mindfulness as like a good coping mechanism for first responders to seek out. Now, the problem was I didn't know where to go. Like where does anybody go to practice mindfulness meditation? You know what I mean? So I
Right.
did. I found myself going to different religious groups and different, you know, living rooms of people that were saying chants and doing chakras and doing the whole weird stuff, and I was kind of just in a wilderness onto my own what this whole thing was. So I did just kind of have to keep going and find my own way through this morass that is called mindfulness meditation. And luckily I was able to find some, basic key points that were very understandable that I could bring into my life as a first responder. And so all I really want to do was take all of that and be able to package it into a practice that maybe a first responder like myself could use if they wanted to prevents the mental health concerns that we are so subjected to as first responders. Mindfulness meditation not only helps prevent mental health issues, but it can even reverse causes that have already begun. So people who are depressive or that struggle with PTSD or struggle with anxiety, a little bit of mindfulness meditation can really go a long way in reversing those consequences as well. It's not always 100%, of course. Sometimes people really do need serious help, obviously, but it is definitely something that, in the same way that many of us have a physical health routine because we're hoping to avoid heart disease, we're hoping to avoid lung disease, we're hoping to avoid medical concerns. Those same people might be interested in ways that they could avoid mental health issues and find a little bit more compassion and joy throughout their life, right? Meditation is definitely a skill that can be learned, trained, and then practiced to do those things.
No, you're incredibly right, and that is something that, you know, I'm guilty of not doing enough. My wife, she is a big proponent of mindfulness. She's told me about being mindful, implementing it in my daily life. Well,
Hmm.
she does a lot more than I do, and I'm very guilty. I need to do it a lot more. But she's a very big proponent of mindfulness, just like I think it needs to be a bigger portion of something that could be taught even just in the academy. Everything is so right now is so reactive in the first responder community. So when this happens, okay, here's the resources there's the psychologist, the psychiatrist, rather than here are things that you can implement into your life as a first responder or even during the academy before you even get on to
Hmm.
help, you know, just to help with the wear and tear, the grind, the chaos that you're going to experience as a first responder. So if and when you do start to feel, the negative side effects of, being a first responder, being a cop, a firefighter, doctor, paramedic, whatever you want to say, the side effects or the symptoms that you might be going through might be maybe lessened just a little bit because you've already been implementing things to, help, decrease the possible or just, help. I guess what I'm trying to say is help it decrease or at least lessen what
Yeah.
it could have been had you not have implemented mindfulness or just something that could help you in regards to your mental health.
Well, look, man, I obviously agree with everything you said there, but the thing about mindfulness meditation is that it really does get ahead of our moment to moment thoughts, impulses, and emotions, right? The practice is very good at allowing us to become aware of what's concerning ourselves right now. And that can be very, very good of preventing, any serious debilitating depression or post traumatic stress that's keeping us awake at night or keeping us deranged as people, right? So of course I agree with everything you've said there. It's a very important practice, and the most important thing I think I can do with what I'm out there trying to promote is bring it, just like you said, to academies, right? It's very hard to get every 18-year-old that signs up to be a police officer, every 24-year-old that signs up to be a cop. It's very hard at that point in our lives to give them a therapist and medication, right? It's going to
Right.
be very expensive, but you can absolutely get 20 or 30 recruits after their morning PT, after their morning physical time. They can definitely sit down for 10 minutes and learn a little bit about their own mind and how it tends to hum, how it tends to pattern itself and what they tend to be experiencing, so that as they progress through the academy, not only are they learning a skill that they can go back to, but it's also a skill that's very preventative for these concerns that we have. It is the same reason why we do physical fitness as cops and firefighters. It wasn't too long ago that 50, 60 years ago, firefighters and police officers were dying of heart disease right in the middle of responding to calls. Not to say it doesn't still happen and we need to fix those numbers even more now, but those numbers have dramatically improved. And it's because we've accepted this culture of diet and exercise into the first responder world. And I feel like the same kind of thing needs to happen with our mental health as well. And to my knowledge, there's nothing that is a better system of understanding your own mental health than mindfulness meditation. If you want to understand your own mind, there's no better way to do it than to just sit down and observe your own mind. And this is something that we can be giving to recruits early in their training so that hopefully someday they can go back to the practice if they ever feel like they might need something before the divorce, before the mental health breakdown, before they lose their job or develop that addiction. There is something here that we can give you as a recruit that you can later go back to in life. And I agree with you. I think mindfulness meditation can solve both of those problems in a very simple and elegant way.
And I wanted to ask you just if you had to explain it to, a new recruit or maybe, a fellow firefighter or just a first responder in general, like what mindfulness is.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people hear mindfulness, it can mean 30 different things to 30 different people.
Correct.
Um, like in the simplest terms, like what would you say, or like how would you explain it to a fellow
Okay.
first responder?
Really good, man. So mindfulness is just a skill, really. The same way being patient is a skill, the same way being a good listener is a skill. Mindfulness is just one of those life skills. You might see it in emails, or people might say it, hey, be mindful of this, be mindful of so and so. All that really means is someone's acute ability to be aware of their own experience. Okay, that's all being mindful is. It's just your ability right now to be aware of what you are experiencing. Okay, so someone who's really mindful can detect frustration in and of themselves much, much sooner than the average person. A mindful individual can detect, the subtle changes in their own body language a little bit more that can kind of help them clue into whether or not they've become distracted from a conversation or whatever, right? The more mindful you are, the more of an ability you have to be aware of yourself in any given moment. Now, meditation, this is more like the gym, okay? Meditation is where you go to practice the skill of being mindful. So, the same way you might go to a bench press or a squat rack to practice being strong in those various muscle groups, okay? What you're hoping to do is take those skills out of the gym and use them in your job as a first responder. Same thing here with meditation, okay? Mindfulness is the skill that we're trying to develop. Meditation is where we're going to go for X amount of minutes today to just continue to practice the skill of being mindful moment to moment. So that's how I try to explain it, okay? Now, what we're doing when we're meditating, okay, what we are actually doing is if you've ever tried it before, you'll have an instructor that says something like focus on the breath, right? Or focus on sounds. Now, they give you that instruction for only one real reason. It's so that when you do lose your attention, and you will, many people start meditation, they stop as soon as they begin because they say things like, well, I just can't shut my mind off, or I just can't clear my mind. Well, no secret, none of us can, and that's what we're training in the practice. So I tell you something simple like focus on the breath, and within 2 or 3 breath cycles, you're already thinking about the room is too hot, or you're thinking about a conversation you had yesterday with a coworker, or you're anxious about work coming up tomorrow, right? Now I've asked you to focus on the breath, and within just a few seconds, you're already thinking about something else. Now, the moment you realize that you've come off the project to focusing on the breath, that moment right there is the practice. You've now become aware that you've lost your attention. Who knows for how long, really, and who knows what you're actually thinking about, but you're now aware that you've lost your attention. And the only thing to do now is bring it back once again to the breath. Now, every time you do this, it's like a small repetition for your attention and for your ability to regulate your own mind. It's okay to lose your attention, but it's in the act of actually regaining it and bringing it back to whatever you're trying to focus on. When you do that skill several hundred times, you then become much, much better at maintaining your attention. So many of us spend hours a day on our phones, training our attention to be disinterested if the video isn't fun and engaging enough within a few seconds. And we're just training our attention to be lazier and weaker, right? But mindfulness is kind of the opposite. It's trying to maintain your attention on a single stimulus without losing it. And anytime you notice that you have lost it, to bring it back and you just continue to train this single skill. And then once you've gained enough attention, once you can maintain your attention on your breath for, say, 20, 30 seconds without mind wandering, that's when we can begin to feel the stillness, the slowness of our thought. We can actually begin to not be so governed by our emotions. Many of us get angry and we almost feel taken over by the sensation of anger, right? And we
Right.
can't help but act it out. Well, once you've practiced mindfulness for some time, you'll just notice the sensation of anger arise within you and easily let it pass by without feeling, now ignited by it and that you have to act it out. Does any of that make sense? That was kind of a long-winded way of explaining it.
No, it does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. And it's like anything else, right? It's like you said, it's like going to the gym. It's
Mhm.
muscle memory. It's something that, building that muscle memory and being
Mhm.
able to engage in it consistently enough to be able to be aware of, okay, the act and practice of being mindful is when, like you said, you're engaged, you focus on your breath, you disengage, you start thinking about something else like, oh, wait, I need to focus back. And that in and of itself is the practice of being mindful. And no,
So
you're
many of
good.
us will be listening to somebody that we care about, right? And our mind will begin wandering and what did you say? What did you say? Like I'm looking right at you. I'm presumably the words are reaching my eardrums, right? It's not like,
Right.
but it's just not registering. And that's because we've gotten to the point, so many of us, that we begin to lose that diligent ability to hone our own attention, and our mind can become a little bit lazy. It can become a little bit unaware of its own ability to leapfrog from thought to thought, emotion to emotion. And mindfulness is just the constant skill. It's basically you're practicing remaining undistracted. And just doing that a little bit each and every day gives you the ability to not be distracted by even your emotions. So here you are, someone just said something super offensive to you, but instead of being captivated by it and allowing your emotions to trigger, you can just notice your emotions have triggered and let it pass away without the following moment after that being succumbed to the fact that you're now pissed off and want to rage. Does that make sense?
Right.
It's just about what is an emotion really? Emotion is just some sort of pattern of pressure in my chest, heat in my head. You're just frustrated, you feel your eyes dilate, and now you're this thing of mad. But really, those are just all body sensations that can just come and go as easily as, clouds in the sky, like they say in meditation circles. But we don't need to become hyperfixated on that emotion. It can just pass by, and we can just maintain our attention on the current problem and respond to whatever comes next with some clarity of thought without being emotionally driven. So, mindfulness can kind of touch so many areas of our lives just because when we are sitting in practice, we're constantly being pulled around. There's nothing. If any one of your listeners has ever meditated, it shouldn't come as any surprise to them that a lot of people feel very bored in the practice at first. Well, even overcoming that boredom can kind of be one of the things that you're trying to learn. Like,
Right.
why is boredom so darn boring anyway? Can't you become interested in why that itself is arising in your experience and just focus on that? And just that ability to just constantly focus your attention on a single stimulus just has wide ranging benefits for us as people and even as first responders who are trying to critically think under pressure, who are trying to regulate our emotions when we're having a difficult time on scene. All these things can be very beneficial not only for our loved ones and our crews as we become better company to be around, but also we aren't subjecting ourselves to our own worst impulses when we do something when we do something silly, if that makes sense.
Right. It's like being able to almost like declutter, detoxify outside stimulus to the point where it's like have you heard of the term like a flow state?
Yes, yes.
So it's like tapping into a flow state.
Exactly. So, let's talk about flow state. It's perfect. A lot of people have had that experience of doing something, right? Here you are doing something that you do well, whether or not it's, blowing glass or doing some sort of art project or whatever it happens to be. And before you know it, 2 hours have gone by and you've just watched your hands take these raw materials or take these whatever it happens to be, and then slowly put together this piece of art or this thing that you're working on, right? And that can kind of be like this really mindful experience for anybody who's ever had it, You're just kind of a passenger along the way as your body and mind kind of create this thing. Now that is a quasi meditative adjacent experience to have. However, the only thing to notice about that is that state just kind of arose without you being part of it. If anyone has ever had a flow state, it's not like you sat down and said, "Okay, I'm going to turn this flow state on. I'm going to go." It just kind of comes at its own. It comes at you for whatever reason, whatever happens to be that day. The planets are aligned the right way. Your hormones are the right. You got enough sleep last night. But mindfulness is kind of trying to cultivate that state in less and less creative ways. As boring as that sounds, right? You're trying to cultivate that awareness in that ability to stay focused with something as benign and interesting as the breath or whatever sound happens to be in the room.
Mm.
When you're doing something amazing and you're having this flow experience, typically you're very busy. Okay, mindfulness meditation is kind of trying to create that experience or have that experience to some degree without distractions, just right here in my own head, in my own body, with something as uninteresting as the breath. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you're trying to train that, if not a little bit every day, but a few times a week. So,
And I was going to ask, just for you personally, what role has mindfulness, played in helping you, processing trauma or dealing with high stress calls on the job?
yeah, dude. I would definitely say what it did for me more than anything was it made me a better husband and it made me a better father. It made me a better captain and crew member to be around. That was probably the number one thing I noticed. It was a gift for other people. I was less difficult to be around. I was less of an anxious person. I was less irritable as an individual. And just being better company for others made me a little bit happier in general because the people around me enjoyed me around more often. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even a 5 or 10% improvement in that area of your life, being better company for those around you is a huge improvement to your personal life because again, the people around you like you more, right? So that it was immediately beneficial. But as far as on the job, we've all had that experience of on scene of feeling like, the walls are closing in or that there's too much going on, right? And I've had those experiences too.
Right.
And by no means am I above having those experiences again if I was on the right scene. I'm sure I could get emotionally worked up like anybody. But what mindfulness has been able to do for me is give me the ability to process my emotions much quicker if I do have one on scene. And it's also given me the ability to prioritize things much faster. I used to kind of hear the tones, right? Let's say it's a 4-car pileup with ejections and the freeways are stopped on both sides and you just know it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a lot. I can kind of just take the information on, notice any emotional response or notice any distracting thoughts, and kind of move through them without feeling captured by them. Have you ever been trying to focus on say like reading a book and you'll read this paragraph 3, 4 times in a row and you won't know what you've read. We all do that in our own heads so often we don't realize how often we do it. You will be trying to focus, and many of your listeners are probably trying to listen to this conversation right now, but they're continually being distracted by a text message that they're talking to somebody on their phone and texts keep coming through, or they're being distracted by whatever song just came on the radio, or whatever it happens to be. Well, this is no different than being pulled away from your on scene report because you're focused on something else or you're being distracted by a conversation that you just had yesterday. Now, mindfulness can kind of allow you to put other things that you are thinking about or focusing on and be able to delay that until you're ready to pick it up again, if that makes sense. Your mind isn't just being I talk about our minds like we're living with the worst dispatcher inside our heads. We're being dispatched to this call over here, we're being dispatched to that one, and we're just never really able to be where we want to because our minds are wandering. And the practice can kind of just give you the ability to take control as the own dispatch center and not be subjected to its constant notifications.
That's a great way of being able to break it down, because that's kind of led into my next question, which was going to be like, how does mindfulness, differ from, say, like traditional, coping mechanisms, that first responders might use? Like, I mean, we all use dark humor. Well, I shouldn't say all, but I would say like
Yeah,
99% of first responders use dark humor or compartmentalization or distraction as a means of getting through the job and getting through those high intense or those serious calls. Um,
absolutely.
so yeah,
I,
if
I
you
would
can,
say mindfulness differs in a lot of ways from a lot of different skills. It's a skill that's dedicated towards self improvement all the time. And we're not trying to. A lot of people, mindfulness meditation needs better PR. When most people think about mindfulness, they think about meditation. They think about yoga pants on Saturdays, or they think about mountaintops and guys that are meditating in caves for 20 years, right? But it's ridiculous. That would
right.
be like everybody pointing to Arnold Schwarzenegger and saying that's what you need to look like in order to be, quote, physically fit, right? Well, no, he's an athlete. It's a physical athlete, right? Same thing with these meditators. There are meditation athletes out there, for lack of a better term, who have just dedicated their entire lives to getting deeper and deeper into their own mind. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that from my perspective. But to the average copper firefighter, there are some serious benefits we can get from 5, 10 minutes every other day ish of focusing your attention. And this is what's important to recognize is there's nothing woo-woo about the practice. There's nothing overly hard to grasp about the practice. It's been bogged down by thousands of years of religious dogmatism. Now you ask me a question, how is it different from other things? Well, your mind is different from everything else in your life. It's the most important tool that you and I have. For what it's worth, right now, I'm offering you and your listeners my own mind. You're hearing my thoughts as I'm hearing them, and I'm trying to answer your questions. And I'm giving you the best version of myself as far as a meditation instructor, and that's what I'm offering to you, and that's what you're offering to me, and that's what we're always offering to other people and to the communities we serve is the state of our minds. Today, if you're tired and you're overworked and you're hungry, you're going to be impatient. You might not listen to that community member a little bit more and might make a unnecessary arrest or slap on an unnecessary charge because you're frustrated. And that's just your mind doing things in the world because of the state that it's in. Mindfulness is a practice of trying to constantly be aware of the state of your mind so that you can better use it, better wield it, and not succumb to its moment to moment distractions. So, mindfulness is like the ultimate skill in being a better purveyor of your own mind, but also ultimate skill in being able to put down different aspects of our lives. I'm much better at putting down my life as a first responder now, having understood the practice of mindfulness than I used to be. The uniform just kind of used to come home with me. And, I used to kind of just take my home problems with me to work. I would derange myself at work with all of my stress at home, and I would derange myself at home with all of my problems at work. And I couldn't put the two things down. But mindfulness is a perfect way of being able to right now, not only put down the stress of the job, but put down the last breath to focus on this one. And then in the next breath, put down this breath to focus on the next one. And you're just constantly trying to put down what's happened last. And you're constantly trying to avoid what you think is going to happen next to just become more and more sensitive to this experience that we all call now. And the better you get at doing that, the less susceptible you are to the mind's trickeries of keeping you somewhat dissatisfied with your present experience. So many people have gotten that promotion they've always wanted, or you became the police officer that you always wanted to be, or you recently married, right? You
Mhm.
married the love of your life, and you're standing there on your honeymoon holding her in the sunset thinking, I'm never going to have a bad day again. This is the best moment of my life. Now, why isn't that going to last? Within a day or two, you're already frustrated because your breakfast came out too cold. You're frustrated because you had to wait 10 minutes at the table, you know? Like, how come we can't hold on to these experiences that we call the best in our lives? And that's just because your mind is constantly trying to make you somewhat dissatisfied with your experience. As soon as you get married, you begin to be dissatisfied that, you aren't dancing with her now or whatever. That's a terrible analogy. That's going to fall flat. But you get my point. We're always happy one minute just to be dissatisfied the next. And that's because your mind wants to keep you subtly dissatisfied. It's evolution's hijack for motivation. When you're dissatisfied with your experience of hunger or exhaustion or thirst, you're motivated to go hunt or drink, right? Or go get some sleep. It's an evolutionary hack for motivation. But so many of us have all those needs taken care of. But we find ourselves endlessly dissatisfied with whatever is coming next. And mindfulness can help you see a little bit of that trickery that your mind's constantly pulling on you and finds a little bit of joy in just this next sip of coffee or this next moment with your wife. Even if it's not full of the pyrotechnics of being on vacation, just holding your wife's hand can be a very deep and meaningful experience if you practice gratitude and enjoying that experience. But so many of us just hold our wives' hands or we just go to work realizing that we're in the prime of our lives as a first responder with our best crew we've ever had. And we never practice being grateful for those experiences. And we wonder years down the road why we're so miserable. Well, you've had a great time this entire time. You were just asleep for it, for lack of a better term.
Right. Right. And I think, being, and I'm sure this is the same for you guys being firefighters, with cops, I think it's I can see why, especially, first responders become so disillusioned or become so engaged with the negative aspects of life. And again, it's, as you know, I mean, being a cop, usually when firefighters come to the scene, everyone's happy. When I come to the scene,
Nobody's happy.
nobody's happy. You fucked up somewhere.
Mhm.
Everyone hates you. You're getting lied to constantly. And engaging in that over and over and over and over again, I can see why it is so easy to just, I hate life. I'm pissed at life.
Oh, yeah.
Everything sucks. I come home and then I got to deal with personal stuff. I'm sick and tired of dealing with everyone and everything. And again, another reason why I put a ring on it for my wife is practicing an attitude of gratitude and being thankful and just trying to find the positives, even if it's something tiny, just the minutia of practicing putting positivity out there and just receiving that positivity back.
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's so many things to be grateful for every day, and I know it sounds silly, and this will probably be the most meditative instructor thing I'll say, but I mean,
Please,
like,
please do.
you know, tomorrow really isn't guaranteed. Like, I'm 36 now. I still feel like I probably have quite a few years ahead of me, right? But I'm starting to hear about 34-year-olds pass away in their sleep for some unknown cause.
Right.
Tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and none of us know when it's going to be over, right? But I love my morning cup of coffee, and for years I would just guzzle it down and not really ever taste it, just to notice my cup was empty and move on. But mindfulness has kind of given me the ability to really enjoy the sip of coffee when I'm aware enough to enjoy it. Does that make sense? Like,
Mm.
you can slow down and actually have this experience of a moment of enjoyment, whether it's because you're having your favorite cup or because you're going to the career you always wanted. If you haven't, so many of us love to be inconvenienced by the life we wish we had someday. So many of us get the
Right.
life that we wish we wanted just to be immiserated by it and constantly complain about the issues that we have with all the things that we wanted. And there's really no need for that. I mean, there's always going to be problems to solve in life. There's always going to be another problem. But it isn't the goal in life shouldn't be to solve all of my problems. It should be a way to find fulfillment in the act of solving the problems of my life. Everybody dies with a to-do list left. Nobody ever completes the to-do list and then it's over. Somebody else will clean out your junk drawers after you've passed away, and somebody else will eventually solve some of these headaches that you've waited so long to get around to. But in the meantime, we're just waking up as people. We're solving problems. We're telling ourselves the story of our life. And we're trying to find some level of fulfillment in that project day in and day out. And many of us wait for that 1 week vacation where we can spend $5,000 and take our family to some remote destination on this planet and say, finally, for these couple days, I can be happy, just to be pissed off because they don't have your favorite beer, and now you gotta have Tecate Light instead of Coors, whatever it is. And it's
Right.
like, there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to enjoy this project of my life better, rather than just always waiting for happiness to come later, you know? And that's one thing that mindfulness is very good at, is giving you the tools to appreciate the now, this moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, without these peak experiences being the ones that usher in just a few fleeting moments of happiness. You really can find a way to be presently content and just continue to practice keeping that more and more onward forward in the future without having to move the environment around that finally gives you permission to be happy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you brought up a really good point of just being able to enjoy the journey itself rather than, the final destination of where you're trying to get to. Especially as first responders, I hear so many like, I'm ready to get on vacation, like everything's shit at work right now. And then finally when I get to that vacation or want, okay, I'm gonna, do all my work as a cop. I'm gonna, my family life might suck. I can worry about that 30 years after, when I finally retire. For now, I'm picking up all the OT I can. I can do all this rather than, you said just enjoying the day to day life, which isn't to say like every day is going to be peaches and cream. No,
Right.
exactly. We're all gonna, we're all gonna have our problems. But like you said, it's being able to trying to take the time to enjoy something or, just trying to be grateful for maybe like one thing a day or whatever it is and just enjoying the journey. Cause like you said, we only have one life and none of us get out alive.
Nope, none
And
of us get out alive.
and like you said, we all have a to-do list and nobody completes a to-do list in their life 100%. So it's about practicing an attitude of gratitude and just
Mhm.
enjoying the journey of life. And so, with that being said, a lot of the things when I hear with first responders, when it comes to either therapy or gym time, but we'll just say, for today's sake, regarding mindfulness, the biggest thing I hear with first responders is schedule. Like, I don't have time. I can't do this. I got personal stuff, whatever it is. So I was just wondering, like, for you, what are some tips or like what are some small steps that first responders can take in regards to trying to implement mindfulness?
Yeah, man, I love that question. One of the best things you can do to try to implement some sort of mindfulness is just to pick it up when you think of it. If you're considering this idea of mindfulness and you're curious about what this old firefighter said about meditation, a lot of people think they got to rush out and start practicing, an hour or two a day. And that's just not true. You can literally practice being mindful the next time you're looking at your phone, realizing that have you ever had that moment where you've just realized that 20 or 30 minutes have gone by and you've just been scrolling on your phone and you wake up and say, "Oh my, I was just trying to check my email and now
Hmm.
20 minutes." Right? That right there is a beautiful mindful moment to just realize how reliably you just lost your own attention for 20 minutes. Here you were just going to check this email, and now 20 minutes later you're just endlessly going through car videos or whatever it happens to be. That right there is a beautiful moment of mindfulness, and we've all experienced it. You're trying to practice that state of awareness. And if you want to kind of get more familiar, just take 10 seconds a day, 20 seconds a day, and slowly build up from there. And just try to focus on your breath or the sounds around you. This is why I built Foundation Fortified, is to give first responders a place to go if they're ever curious about mindfulness meditation, without all the pyrotechnics of, the woo woo chakra energies, all the silly yoga, conversation and chit chat. I'm not saying there's nothing valuable there, but what I am saying is most first responders want to get the practice, understand what it is, and not be ushered around by the unnecessary details of it. That's what Foundation Fortified is there. On my website, I have a whole free side so that anybody can go and be like, okay, at least I want to know what it is and what I'm trying to do. And if you go over there and you do those, I think 16 to 18 meditations,
Mm.
you will definitely be able to say that, okay, I know the practice, I've done it for a little while. And yes, I enjoy it. I'll pick it up sometimes, or no, it's not for me, or yeah, I love it. Give me some more. Then you can even go and be a subscriber after that. But there's definitely enough free content there for any first responder to be able to understand the practice, begin to get their feet wet, and then complete those two sections and
Mhm.
the other free ones I got there, knowing that they have a grasp and that they understand what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what I've done with Foundation Fortified, is give first responders a place to go, and on the subscriber side, give first responders a place to continue to practice if they like to. But at least on the free side, recruit academies can use it with the recruits if they want. They can just hit play and walk the recruits through this little bit of a mindfulness course if they would like to, or you can do it for personal and private reasons as well. So that's everything you can find at foundationfortified.org.
And that was gonna be my next question. Where can folks, first responders, where can they find you at?
Yeah, man. So I got Facebook and Instagram under Foundation Fortified. I have my website, foundationfortified.org. And, I teach mindfulness meditation at the Runestone Ranch in California. You can hear me every week on the Thin Line Rock Station. It's a police and firefighter owned and operated radio station. You can hear me there every week on Wednesdays. I host the Midweek Mindfulness Show. And you can also find various things I've written for the Firehouse Tribune and different areas. But my website is foundationfortified.org, and you can find my Facebook and my Instagram under that same term.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. Um, and say, I want to just, leave you with this last question. Say you're head of the department, you're the head honcho, you're the chief of Mesa Fire Department. How would you implement, or how could you implement mindfulness? Just being able to incorporate it into department culture, whether it's briefings, academy life, like what would you do to implement it?
Man, I don't know if I like that. I've never been asked that, to be honest with you. So with Foundation Fortified, I'm not, believe you me, I've had crew members in the past that have been the ones that I've tried to subject to meditation. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Guys, you got to try it. I've like forced my crew to sit down and give it a try, and it's never gone well. Forcing somebody to sit down and meditate is never like an easy project to do.
Right.
But I do think I would do exactly what we talked about earlier. If I was a fire chief, I would seek to be the first fire chief to put mindfulness meditation in my recruit academies, not as something I'm forcing them to do, but as part of my curriculum, as part of what I would like to leave my recruit. I would like it to be part of their training, their package of training. I'm going to train you on how to do this aspect of your job. I'm going to train you how to take care of your body. And I'm going to give you this little bit of ancient training in this modern context of what mindfulness meditation is to help you train your mind and your emotional regulation. I would absolutely implement in my recruit academies. I think that would be my first step. I do believe the harder thing to do, not only as a fire chief if I was one, but even as a meditation instructor myself now, the hardest thing to do is to get, our current veterans to sit down and give it a try. It's easier to get young minds and young people to embrace this practice and to kind of give it a try. It is harder to get some people my age or older, the, to see that there is something here. There's a baby in the bathwater here that we should try to rescue, not only for your mind and for your career, but for those that are coming behind us. We don't want them to suffer the same alcoholism, gambling addiction, whatever problems we're facing as first responders. We got to be doing something for the mental health of our recruits. And I think mindfulness is a great place to start. Probably the simplest and most elegant way to start is to just ask them to sit down and focus on their own mind.
No, I love it. That's awesome. Yes, it's definitely tougher to try to have the older generations to engage in any type of like you said, mental health practices, or I think it's just, different generations, but I think it's nice. I'm starting to see a lot more younger recruits coming in asking about, okay, well, what are you guys doing, like mental health wise
Mhm.
in the department? Things that, you know, you really haven't seen or been talked about in the last decade or so. So it's cool to see, these younger recruits that are coming in who still want to be first responders really trying to implement or ask about like, hey, what's being done, or like what type of resources are there for mental health.
I agree. I wish I came in with those questions. I wish I came in with those questions. So I'm glad it's starting to become more part of the culture. I think it's important.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it, taking time out of your busy schedule. Before we head on out, do you have any last words, any words of advice for anyone who's looking to, and start their mindfulness journey, or, any type of maybe recruit who's interested, and trying to implement this? Yeah, just any words of advice for anyone listening.
Only words of advice I'd give as far as, trying to implement anything into your department or is to try to get a little bit of buy-in from others as you're doing it. Like it's me specifically about mindfulness meditation, but as just a fire captain, someone who's been in the industry for a long time, if you want to make change, one of the best ways to do it is to try to get the cooperation of a couple of people around you. It's going to be very hard to change the mind of the many and of your administration if you can't change the mind of your crew that likes you, wants you to be successful every day. You
Right.
know what I mean? So I would definitely say if you want to make changes and you got ideas, definitely start with getting familiar with your crew and then trying to ask them what path is going to be the best way for you to get your idea heard and seen. Because usually, in my experience, when I have the help of people behind me, I can definitely go further, like wind in my sail, than I can if they're blowing against me.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today. This has been an episode of the Code 3 Industries podcast. And just the last word, too, again, just as the first responders, there's a reason why, as we talked about earlier, there's a reason why the suicide rates are so high in the first responder community. So, and I know this is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. Just wanted to say, hey, if you see someone struggling, or even if you don't, just be a friend. Check on your partners, your unit, your squad. You know, you never know when it could save someone's life. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us, and I will see you guys on the next one. Josh, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.